can be upfront and honest and say, actually in this application, I think this product over here that I don't represent would be better for you. That all of a sudden now you become a trusted advisor rather than a salesman.
And I often say that we have all the requirements of space, right? Because it has to go underground and send us data from miles and miles away, and it has to work. Like, failure is not an option.
We'll put on, a standard mule shoe. Ours is slightly different just for that, but it's, everybody's got one.
The top drive and the drawworks really don't care whether the electrons coming at it are from a joystick or a PLC.
The panel, what you see here on the left, which is now controlled by one of my students, is showing you actually the control of our brakes.
As of now, geothermal is a pretty small market.
If you have tortuosity, the casing will be up against the side on part of the well. There won't be any cement there. The cement will have crescent around it.
So managed pressure drilling, it's been defined as a process to precisely control the pressure profile in the wellbore.
The key is being transparent with our clients in this case. So tell them what happened. If we had a failure, tell them exactly what happened. Whether it's our fault, whether it's whatever the issue was, we need to be transparent.
I think it's very important for everyone in the industry to know what's out there and kind of what's happening downhole as well.
I've probably worked on over 40 different performance limiters in my career. If I miss any of those and the computer is raising weight on bit and I miss any of those, I have a train wreck. The computer's going in the ocean.
Here's your new colors, here's your new thing. We don't do that at all.
Here's the tattoo you need to get.
Yeah, here's the tattoo. Sorry about the last one. We used to fake that all the time.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the show. This is the Vidor Locksmith Show. I'm your host, David Gibson, where we are unlocking the secrets to success in the oil and gas industry, one interview, one presentation, and one technical screw-up by me at a time. I'm so happy that you guys are here with me today. It's an amazing Friday. I've had an absolutely awesome week and really looking forward to the presentation and everything, the interview today. Have to be able to give a big shout out to everybody at Oilfield Connections International. Yesterday, went and spoke at the Kingwood event. I feel like there's a delay or something. I don't know. I also got rid of the teleprompter. It was too much. It just wasn't working. It just didn't feel right. I was not looking directly into the camera. I was looking off. I don't know. It just too bulky and wasn't really fitting purpose. We'll bring it back for doing some other things. Plus, now it's just another piece of audiovisual equipment that we've got. Anyways, yeah, Oilfield Connections International. Had a great time speaking to that group yesterday. Really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much to Sarge Summers, Doug Taylor, and Melanie Woods for being able to put that on, as well as all the people that were there yesterday who got up and spoke and presented themselves. There's still a lot of people out there in the industry that are looking for jobs, and what an amazing group. We even stood up and said the Pledge of Allegiance. That was absolutely amazing. I haven't done that, and at least with a group of people like that, like, I don't know how long it's been, grade school or something at least. So that was, it was a really, really cool event. Great food. Really appreciate all the people that came out to be able to support, as well as Artie Morrison and Jenny Wilson from over at Dixon Directional. Really appreciated having them in the audience, and got to plug them a little bit while we were there. So yeah, thank you guys for being here. All right, let's, do the normal stuff. Let me know where you guys are watching from. If this is your first show to tune into, let us know. If you were at the Oilfield Connections thing International yesterday, let me know as well. Or if you've been to any of the OCI events around, I would say the country, but they're international. OCI International. So what OCI chapter are you a part of? Which events have you attended? Let us know about that as well. So yeah, I was in Houston for the day yesterday. Very quick, got in, got out. That was it. Visited with a couple of clients, did the thing, and got back here to Austin area. Not really in Austin or the Wimberley area, to be able to do the interview. The person we're interviewing today is actually from the Austin area as well. So, wow, tons of emails all of a sudden coming in. Let's dismiss all of this nonsense. Oh, my computer wants to restart. Yeah, you're not doing that right now. We'll say tonight. How about that? Off the screen. completely wiped my computer this past weekend and rebooted it with everything. So there's still a couple little things that happen time to time that I'm going to be able to take care of. This still seems like it's kind of herky jerky. I don't know what the heck this problem is. All right. Patty Murphy, thanks for tuning in. Kevin Levine with Winter Mud. Brian Dugas from Bowbridge. Some of these people, I don't even have to look what it says. I know where they're tuning in from. Igor from Calgary, thanks for being here. Duncan down at H-Town. Mr. Romero, good morning, David. It was good to see you yesterday in Kingwood. Thanks for being there, sir. Appreciate it. He did get up and talk as well. They give everybody the opportunity to be able to talk at the OCI things for anybody that's unemployed to be able to get up and say, who they are, what they do, and what positions they're looking to be able to fill. So a handful of people did that. It was good. James Harrison from Calgary this morning. All right, still got these email. Like I start the show and then all of a sudden everybody wants to start emailing me. Like, come on, y'all know what I'm doing at 10 a.m. on Fridays. Rashal, all right. Yogashri, I believe that's how we pronounce it. Just making sure I get that right. Say hello from Midland. She's going to be on the show in the month of May. I believe we're going to do 28th. I have to double check with her on that, but she is going to be on the show. Then we've got Andrew Quinlan from the Darkay South. Mike Jeffords, who was there at the OCI event yesterday, says, "What's up, brother? Just doing the show. That's what I'm doing this morning." Sunny Switzerland, LinkedIn user. Wow, thanks for being here, LinkedIn user. As always, you're the most faithful person we've got following the show. Yusef, hi there, ladies and gents. Lenore Compton, Andy McDonald, Artie Morrison, Leroy. Thanks for being here, sir. Look forward to hearing from Todd Brooker, especially after connecting with him on LinkedIn recently. Yeah, so we've got Todd Brooker on the show today. He's going to be telling us all about the money side of the business, right? Looking forward to really hearing about this because I know nothing about it. I know how to make money for my company, but that's about it, right? All right, we've got somebody tuning in from Dubai. John DeWart watching from Colorado and watching on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in on YouTube, sir. I appreciate that. Keith Stelter tuning in from Odessa, Texas. I said my first pledge of allegiance to U.S. citizen last Tuesday at the Odessa OCI event. Well, congratulations, sir. Chisholm says this is his first show. Well, thanks for being here. We've got Bakersfield tuning in. Chisholm says from Lagos. That's where he's tuning in from. LinkedIn user in New Mexico. Michelle tuning in. Hello from Houston. This is my first show, and I was at the OCI meeting yesterday. Of course she was. She's actually starting a new business, so she told me about just yesterday, emailed me about it at some point, but congratulations to Michelle. If you're looking for a reservoir engineer, I do believe she's the person to be able to get in touch with. Hi, David. It was at the OCI event yesterday. Well, thank you for being there, and they are a LinkedIn user, so one of our top fans then. LinkedIn user number 2, aka Scott McNeil. Greetings from Jesuit Ward of British Isles, Surrey. Oh, thank you for being here. Miguel Paul Moore tuning in from the Vibrations Technology team out in West Texas, the Permian. Umir, man, like you said. Oh gosh, I did say the name right, and then I was going to try to say it again, and then I didn't prepare my brain for it, and I was just going to butcher it. So, so glad I got it right on the first try. I also turned off the autofocus, so now if I step over here, I go out of focus. If I get too close, I go out of focus. I got to stay like right here in this small little right there, right. I got to stay like right exactly here. Coach. Dave's second show now. I will surprise you. I am jobless MWD watching from Ivory Coast. Dave and second show. Well, Gene, thanks for being here. Kirk Town says, "What's up?" Ozzy from Gordon Technologies team. Sneer. I think we're all caught up. David, Miguel, and LinkedIn user. All right. Got through all of them pretty quick there. Thank you guys for all being here. Do me a favor. Tag a friend in the comment section. Just tag a friend. You don't have to share this. Just tag a friend. Do the little @ thing. And then just a friend. Just a random person that you would like to be able to share the show with. They can come on and share their knowledge. All right. So quick updates. We've got to do this real quick. JP Warren, who's going to be live streaming on Tuesday at 1 o'clock? Or no, 10 a.m. No, yeah, that's right. I told him 10 a.m. Yeah. Something else is happening at Tuesday at 1 o'clock. I don't know what it is. Something in my brain's going Tuesday at 1 p.m. is important. It's Tuesday at 10 a.m. JP Warren, not around the Rotary, Round the Rotary podcast will be live streaming with Keith Stelter. Remember the guy that used to be on the show, did the Minute with Keith, and then he got a job and we kicked him off? I didn't really kick him off. It's just he got a job. So we got to find somebody else to be able to bring on the show and do a minute with. Anyways, JP Warren, he's going to be doing his live stream on Tuesday at 10 a.m. with Keith. Get this stuff right. There's still something happening at Tuesday at 1 p.m. I've got to figure out. Yeah, see, Keith says 10, right? So be sure to check that out. Other news. Where's it at? Oh, there it is. Walk away from the computer without jerking any cords or cables too much. And then come back over here real quick. Get back in the zone of focus, which is what I'm going to call it now, right? Whoever's clicking the green button for watching this, I appreciate it because I could see that over here. There's like a little clappy hands. That's really cool. I appreciate that. When I first started the show and nobody like commented and nobody did anything, but it said we had like 26 people watching, I was always afraid that the number was off because nobody actually engaged with the show. And I used to beg people in the beginning to just like, can you just click the button? Literally, it takes 0 calories. Just click the button to show that like something's happening on the other end, and people still wouldn't do it. So I really appreciate it now. Like it means a lot to me that people are interacting and commenting. It gives you the warm and fuzzy that you're not just talking to a blank room. So anyways, enough about my ramblings. Where is that? On Monday at 1 p.m., Catoosa Test Facility, Howell, Oklahoma. Live streaming in VR. First time ever. 360 VR. Get you a set of these headsets so you can like look around and do all this kind of cool stuff, right? Right? 1 p.m. Monday. Do not forget. I didn't do it at 10 a.m. on Monday because everybody's going to be in meetings, right? They're going to be in conference rooms and conference calls and Zoom meetings and everything else. 1 p.m. Monday. We're going to go live. We're going to stream 360 VR. Very first time it's ever happened. So big shout out and big thank you to the team at Catoosa for making this be able to happen. It's going to be absolutely amazing. Or it's going to be a complete train wreck. One way or the other, we're going to find out, and it's still going to be the first time it's ever been done. We're going to be live on a rig floor in 360 VR. You can watch live from just your phone, right? You can watch live from your computer or desktop, or with your phone and a headset, then you can get the real VR, the full VR experience. We will also do a little bit of video capture right after the fact or beforehand. Some point in time, we'll just do some basic video capture where we just kind of like walk around and do some things. And then we'll upload that video to YouTube separately as well, which will probably be of higher quality. Still some things to be able to test out there, but that way you can still get the experience of walking around the rig in VR and being able to look anywhere. So there's an infinite number of views that can take place. Really, really excited about this. This is the first time it's ever been done. This is a project that I've been working on forever. So really appreciate everybody that went and liked or subscribed to the YouTube channel. Remember, I kept saying we need to have 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. This is what it was for. It was for this project. Right? It was for nothing else. It was only for this. So if this is the only, if this is the, remember I told people, it was like, if you guys don't like it, then we'll just completely destroy the YouTube channel and turn it off. Right? So if you guys do like it, we'll keep it and we'll try to do some more things. So if you're a company that wants to do a 360 live VR event from your facility, from your operations, from your headquarters, wherever it's at, let me know. We'll do the one in Catoosa first, and then, we could follow up and do some more elsewhere later on. All right. That's it for all of that stuff. Hey, Paul, call me later. Hey, Paul, call this guy. There we go. And then we got Miles saying, good morning, everyone. All right. If you haven't already, tag a friend. Oh, wait, hold on. Roy Strawn with Intrepid Directional Drilling Services. Right? Tuning in. Roy, thanks for being here. Watching for Pearland. All right. Okay. Well, Everybody's talking in the comment section. I'm trying to hit as many buttons as I can. All right, so we've got all that stuff to show. VR on Monday. The Vidor Locksmith show is on Monday at 1 p.m., not Friday. We might still do something on Friday. I don't know. I'll just have to like think of something. But 1 p.m. Monday. All right, here is the intro to the How It's Done show. If you haven't watched it, it's over on YouTube. After this, we'll be back with our guest of the day. Todd, thank you so much for being on the show today, sir. Really do appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, David. I love your show.
Oh, so you don't have to lie at the very beginning of the show now. Come on.
You know it's an awesome show. You've got a good vibe, and I like how you educate the masses, and I'm just happy to be a part of it. So thanks for having me today.
Well, Todd, I know that you are you're kind of outside of the normal realm of some of the guests that we usually bring on the show. We usually talk about a lot of drilling related things, but it's also important to know where and how and when the money comes into our industry. And essentially you're that guy. So give us a quick background on who you are and what you plan to educate us on today.
Sure. Well, let me, you mentioned.
Oh, he's leaving.
I still got my my hard hat. So I started on the rig. So I appreciate all that you do, and probably the best thing I did out of college was to go to the rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. So I did drilling, workovers, shallow Gulf of Mexico. So that was a cool way to start my career. But I'm a petroleum engineer from the University of Texas. Reservoir engineer is my specialty. Our firm specializes in reservoir engineering and valuations and reserve reporting, which we'll talk about today. But reserves are equal to money, basically. And so, you mentioned I'm in the money business, and I am, but, let me just be clear. I do not give financial advice. I'm not a good investor myself. This is not financial advice. There's no financial advice here today, and often we're wrong about reserves. Things go bad, as you know, in the field. You're drilling a well, and you drill out a zone, and that well is not as good as it should be. The frac doesn't go right. You have 50 stages and only 30 of them fire off correctly. So a lot of things can go wrong in our business, but we try our best to use data and science to get the reserves right, and then also the value, which we'll be talking about today. And I've got some slides prepared, but I don't necessarily want to go through them one after the other and bore everybody with a slideshow, but I'll be glad to jump around any way you want to, David. Maybe we can do some Q&A along the way, and feel free to stop me, or I'll stop you, or however it goes. Just whatever you want to do. This is your show. This is your show, so you're the guy.
Okay. Well, give us this. Like, what is the beginning stages of being able to do an evaluation on a reservoir, right? Like, I don't even know where to start in, what information do you need? Like, if somebody just comes to you and you're like, hey, I've got a whole bunch of mineral rights, or are they asking you, will they say we've got mineral rights, or my granddad just passed away and all of a sudden and he owned a whole bunch of this acreage out there? Like, how does the process even get started with talking to you guys?
Yeah, good question. And you just hit on something. That I have a project exactly like you just described. I had a new client showed up with a box of check stubs, and unfortunately his mom and dad passed away recently, but he needed an evaluation. So we've got a box of check stubs, and that's the most difficult way to start, because you have to go look at paper, and you have to go figure out, okay, what are the properties, where are the wells, and you start that investigation into, okay, I can identify the API numbers. I can go out in public records or subscription services like Enverus or IHS and find the production data and start the process of building production forecasts and reserves, applying commercial parameters of that, like oil prices, gas prices, price differentials, operating expenses, and most importantly, the ownership. I mean, you own a piece of a well, or you own all of a well, and so we need to know the ownership. And so those are the basic building blocks. You need to identify the asset, identify the wells, or identify the acreage. And you need to look at the acreage and figure out, okay, what's going on here? Is this in the middle of nowhere where there's not any production data or producing wells within 20 miles? Or is this in the thick of the Delaware Basin in West Texas, and it's fantastic rock, and it's active, has a lot of producers, has a lot of upside potential? So, so that's the basics behind what we need, and I certainly can get into details of that today. I'm prepared to if you want to, but
hey, bring it.
Lose too much of your audience here,
Oh, if we're going to lose audience, it's going to be because of me, not because of you, sir.
Well, if you don't mind, if you put up my first slide.
Yeah. Let me pull this off, and then there we go.
Just wanted to start out with a little cartoon. It's been altered slightly, so my apologies to Scott Adams.
Yeah, it's up there.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, this rule number one I wanted to point out is that what I do and people in my business of reserve reporting and doing reserves, you have to be reasonable and appropriate, okay? And often we have clients or people that are not reasonable or appropriate and want big numbers because they want dollars, right? They want capital, and they might push you to do certain things you shouldn't do. And rule number two is following rule number one is you may get fired. And sometimes we do get fired by clients because our numbers aren't exactly what they expected. A simple example is they've drilled 3 wells. One is a barn burner. It's a 1,000 barrel a day well. They drilled a second well, and it's a decent well at 500 barrels a day and declining. But then they also drilled a stinker that was a dry hole. The only one they talk about is the barn burner, right? It's the greatest well ever, and we're gonna replicate that on our next 50 wells we drill. So the reality is that doesn't happen. It rarely happens, and so we have to look at all the data, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And sometimes that doesn't make our clients too happy, but if you talk to them and you work through the issues and you let them understand, here are the guidelines we're working under. Here's what bankers and financiers and the industry expects, then you can start to find common ground and bring the report, bring the reserves and the value into a reasonable and appropriate state. So anyway, I just wanted to state that up front. And so, part of our business is being ethical. Making sure that we follow guidelines and we don't invest in the assets that we value. In fact, we don't invest in oil and gas properties in the first place. And and so that's important. We're third party, we're independent, and our valuations are used for a lot of purposes. And this discussion's about money, and our valuations are used to secure capital, to raise money so you can go drill your wells, build your company, and grow, and maybe even sell someday and put money in the bank and spend time in Tahiti. That's what we're trying to do, right? Or put our kids through school, whatever your objective is.
I'll go with Tahiti.
Tahiti, yep. My wife and I had our 25th anniversary 3 years ago. And I had a trip planned to Tahiti, and then Lake Travis, where I live on, it flooded, and it rose 50 feet in 2 days and flooded into my house and backyard and all that, and it blocked the roads. We couldn't leave, and I didn't get to go to Tahiti, so I haven't been, but I'm planning on it someday. Have you been before?
No, I have not.
Okay.
But I would have found a canoe to get out of that situation if I had to.
Yeah, but luggage, you have to take luggage with you, and my wife likes a lot of luggage to go on trips.
Just buy clothes when you get there.
Yeah.
All right, I'll pull your presentation back up.
That's a good point. Okay, well, so you mentioned valuation. You mentioned dollars.
Yes, sir.
Money. This is about money, but in my world, it's about reserves and then figuring out what that means as far as dollars. So I'll just state up front, I've written a lot about reserves on my LinkedIn account, just like you have so many good things on yours. I've got some good things on mine that focus on reserve reporting, reserve guidelines, reserve categories, just all the little nuances from doing reserves. And so you can go on my LinkedIn account and just go to my recent posts, or actually articles, and you'll see lots there on Reserve Reporting 101. We had a series there last year. I
think that's how I found you.
That's probably true. Or, yeah, it could have been that. Could have been DRW. You've had him on a couple of times, and he's had me on his podcast, and he's a good advocate for the industry.
It's true.
So let me give you a little bit of info on reserve reports, because that's what I do. That's our bread and butter at Cawley Gillespie. And that reserve report basically tells you what reserves you have, what the value is, and it lays out all the assumption that went into that value. And there's a lot of assumptions, you know, especially if you're talking about a reserve report with hundreds or thousands of wells. And then that reserve report is used by banks for collateral. It's used by the SEC or regulatory groups, filings. It's used for a lot of purposes, and I'll get into that. But I'll start out by just saying there's different types of reserve reports, and you need to know what you're looking at. As noted here, there's something called a full report or a full-blown reserve report. There's an audit, and then there's an opinion. And the full report is, you know, it's the Cadillac. It is third-party independent work by our firm or some other firm, and it is the deepest dive that you get. It's very high level of due diligence on production data, forecasting, commercial parameters, all the things that go into a reserve report, and it gets our stamp. It gets our certification that this is a thorough report. We also do audits, which are a little bit less work, but it still can be an independent audit of someone else's work. An oil and gas company, maybe they have a solid engineering staff and they've prepared a valuation. We can audit that, and that's often accepted by banks, by investors, by people that say, yeah, an audit's fine. Let's not do a full-blown report. We're in a hurry. We want to go a little bit faster here. The third type of report is a limited audit or an opinion, which might be, hey, just focus on the type curves. We want to know what you think about the forecast. Or, you know, look at my model. Do I have all the components in there for value? And so we can provide opinions on it, but it's not certified. It's just an opinion, basically. Pardon me, my mouth is a little dry today. So in a reserve report, it looks like this. This is a reserve report, Cawley Gillespie reserve report. Our competitors, they have similar reserve reports, different color, but we have our color, this dark gray, and we also have tan ones. But in here, it contains a letter which describes the purpose of the report, who asked for it, who's the client. It describes all the assumptions that went into it and shows the results. But you know, in there it includes production forecasts, production volumes for existing wells. You know, you have producing wells, but you might have future wells. Wells are going to drill down the road, so it'll have information on those. It has revenue and expense projections. It shows discounted cash flows. It might show rate versus time plots, so you can see how the production is performing on the wells and what types of wells they are. It'll also typically lay out the regulatory guidelines that we're following, and I'll get into that in a little while if you want to. But it also describes reserve categories that are being applied here, and it might be PDP, which is proved, developed, producing, the least risky category, or it might include possible reserves, which are undeveloped, and they're very high risk. And I'll go through reserve categories in just a little bit if that works. I won't go through all these in detail, but these are the key. these are more detailed key components to a reserve evaluation. You have current well production. You have future well production. You have working interest, the ownership interest that your client has. It could be that it's a working interest where they pay operating costs, they have to pay for capital, but it could be a royalty interest, or overriding royalty interest, or a mineral interest where they're not subjected to operating expenses or capital. I won't get into all the detailed different types of ownership today, unless somebody wants to. But the reserve report will contain ownership on the well or all the wells that we're evaluating. The future drills will typically be in the reserve report and show what happens over the next 5 years as far as drilling goes. Drilling can go beyond 5 years, and it often does, but in the guidelines that we use, whether it's SEC or SPEPRMS or even the Canadian guidelines, it's highly recommended and often limited to 5-year drilling. The reserve report will also show the decline that the wells might be exhibiting. In today's world where we're drilling horizontals in unconventional reservoirs, typically the wells start with high production and they decline very fast. We'll also identify the price deck that was used. There might be a NYMEX futures price. It might be a flat $50 oil, $2.50 per MCF gas. But that's important to know because the prices, the commodity prices, drive value. And we can talk about commodity prices if you want to, which none of us have any control over, nor are we very good at predicting it. Let's see, it was, David, it was on Tuesday, a year ago, April 20th, when oil prices went to negative $37, which you could talk about that all day of how does that happen? How does it get to negative 37? But it's related to contracts and things like that. But never thought I would see that in my lifetime, and I'm getting pretty old now, and I've never seen that in a lot. But anyway, it impacts the reserve reports, you can imagine. And at year-end 20, January 1, 2021, which a lot of our reserve reports that have gone out in the last few months were based on, year-end 20, commercial parameters that are applied in the reports were impacted by that April crash and the May crash and the COVID, and everything impacts reserve reports because we have to do look-backs. We have to do historical look-backs at, okay, what's going on with the company? How are their operating expenses running? What kind of prices are they receiving on their oil and gas? And it's been a tough reporting season because of the interruptions that we saw due to COVID and Saudi Arabia, and oil prices didn't just crash because of COVID and demand, but that was a big driver. But also OPEC and Saudi Arabia had a big part of that. Sorry, getting off track, David.
No. I mean, this is all informational.
Okay, and then the reserve report will also focus on commercial parameters such as production taxes. You have to pay the states and the communities you're in for taxes, just like you do with property taxes for your home. Operating expenses. You cost money to produce these wells. Some wells flow on their own because they have enough pressure. Others don't, and you have to have a lifting mechanism, so those cost money. To drill wells, you have to spend capital, or to plug and abandon wells, you have to spend capital. So our reports will also lay out capital expenditures. And the whole reason you do all this, the revenues, the expenses, the capital, is to get to cash flow. What is my cash flow for my company? And that's often shown in the reserve report within each reserve category. And then that cash flow is also discounted at various discount rates. That's basically talking about the time value of money. What is that value now rather than 50 years out? And so we're typically looking for a discounted cash flow or a present value, if you want to call it that. There's different terms for that kind of thing. But anyway, so in a nutshell, that's what's in a reserve report, and it tells you a whole lot about what companies have. And so I can get into reserve. There's a couple things I want to show today because there's some educational things that I think would be helpful for your group. But anyway, I'll stop there for a minute, David. Take a sip of water. What can I?
Well, I got a couple of questions that have come in, so we'll go ahead and bring those up.
Okay.
So somebody says, can a company raise money against booked reserves without a CPR? Not sure what CPR stands for, but.
Well, yeah. What does it stand for? Is that a capital raise? Is that what they're saying? Or okay. I'm assuming it's not because you can't breathe. So can a company raise money against book reserves without a capital raise? Yes. And I can get into that in a little bit, and I'm prepared to. There are many different ways to raise money. You could call David Gibson. He invests in startups, and he will give you money. I would start there, right? Friends and family. Friends and family have started many businesses, as you know, David, and it's no different in the oil and gas industry. But yeah, there are different ways to raise money. You can do GoFundMe these days, crowdsourcing. There's crazy ways to raise money to drill wells.
I don't know if I've ever seen a GoFundMe for drilling a well, but now that you said it, we'll probably see it. So whoever puts it out there, be sure to let us know, and I'll throw $1 towards your campaign.
Yeah. Okay. So in a little while, I'll get into capital raising, and we'll answer some more of those questions. What else you got there?
All right. So we've got another one. Isn't the question, what is the adjacent property producing, and what is their completion design? I think this is when you were talking about with the initial cartoon.
Yeah, it could be, but yeah. So adjacent property, yeah. So if you want to think of it simply, if I drilled a well here, what's it worth? You just look next door if you happen to have a well next door, and that is called an analogy. You look next door as to what did they do? It was a great well. What did they do right? It must have been David Gibson on the rig leading things because it's a great well. It's producing good. So let's go duplicate that. What did they do for their completion design, and how are they producing the well? Those kind of things.
So the LinkedIn user that asked the previous question about CPR said it was competent person's report. Yeah, I wasn't going to guess that one.
Yeah, I don't normally refer to it as CPR, but that's yeah. So can you raise money with a reserve report without a CPR? Is that what it was?
Yes, without a competent person's report.
You can. There are incompetent people out there preparing reserve reports all the time, and they manage to get money and maybe get scammed. But I would highly recommend you have a competent person do the report, and competent engineers and geologists are going to be at some of the bigger consulting firms like ours. And if they have a PE or a CPG at the end of their name for professional engineer or a certified petroleum geologist, those things will tell you, okay, this person's competent. But in reality, the way it works is that all the banks, all the financial institutions, the private equity groups, they have their list of approved CPRs, if you want to say it that way. They know what companies they can rely on for reserve reports and valuations and which ones they can't. So being on that list is critical, and my goal is to keep Cawley Gillespie on all those lists because that converts directly to projects, and I keep my people working and busy and stay in business, and maybe somebody can afford to go to Tahiti. So I like being on those lists, but doing that you have to prepare reasonable and appropriate reserves. You have to be ethical. You have to follow standards so that when those investors put up billions based on your reserve report and other things that they look at, it's critical that they can rely on it.
So great segue into the next question. A few years ago, there was a huge scandal with several majors, especially Shell. Way to throw somebody under the bus, and being able to do it anonymously here, being found to have overstated their reserves. How was that allowed to happen and go undetected for so long?
Yeah, good question. There's some nuances here. So the industry that we're in, it was not a horizontal industry 15 years ago. It was all vertical drilling, right? And George Mitchell, God rest his soul, he worked hard and discovered how to apply horizontal drilling in the Barnett Shale, and made it work. And it's been improved and replicated, and it has advanced all our basins, since that point in time. But we've shifted from a vertical drilling world to a horizontal drilling world, and maybe we've shifted back just a little bit too. There's a vertical drilling is kind of back in vogue because it costs a tenth or less to drill vertical wells than horizontal. But still, horizontal wells, as you know, they cover a lot of territory. If you drill a mile or 2 or 3 miles in zone, it's like drilling dozens of vertical wells. But I'm kind of getting off subject here just a little bit.
It's all right.
What happened with shale as we shifted to a horizontal world, it was confusing as to, well, how many drills can I book that I can call proven? I've got this beautiful reservoir, and it goes from here, 30 miles wide, 30 miles long. It's a big reservoir, and you know what? It's the zone we're targeting. The shale that we're targeting is pretty continuous over the whole thing. So I've got a well here, and I've got a well here. Why can't I book 10 in between those 2 wells? I've got space for it, so let me just book 10. It's proven. I got the geology, check. I've got production data, check. It's commercial, check. And the next thing you know, as people started building out their reserves, they added more, and they added more, and they added more. And you get to a point where you're able to book so many drills, but you really probably never are going to get to some of them. You don't have that much capital to drill them, and you can't drill them as fast as you're saying. And so what happened was markets changed, markets crashed. All of a sudden capital was down. You can't drill all those wells you promised the markets, and those kind of things just ended up biting shale, and they bit in many companies where reserves were overbooked, and they were caught in trying to play in the game of booking all these horizontal wells, these sticks, booking all these sticks on the map, but just couldn't quite get to them. And so and on top of that, each one of those sticks, each one of those drills had reserves, and they may have booked them, let's just say 500,000 barrels a well. Well, after they drilled 10 or 20 wells, it really should have been 300,000 per well. Okay, but man, do we want to take a write down, or are we going to get better? Is technology going to bail us out here, or oil prices going to bail us out here? And let's just leave the 500,000 barrels per well there for now, and hope for the best. And the best didn't happen, and there's a handful of things like that caught up with Shell and others.
Yeah, I think hold on just a sec. David Ramsden Wood, who's been on the show before, said, hope is not a plan. So that actually was the plan at somebody's company, and it didn't work out. So hope can be the plan, it just may not be the right one. Okay, so we got another question in here. At these conditions of $60 per barrel, are companies making money? How much dollars per barrel are produced?
Well, it's a loaded question there, but yeah, at $60.
Yes, it is.
At $60 oil and the service company cost environment that we're in right now, yeah, you're having commerciality in lots of basins with lots of wells right now. But if oil prices stay up, I expect that service company costs are going to go up with it. And that's easy to track. If you look back in time at oil prices and rig count and service company costs, they move hand in hand. If oil prices crash, rig count crashes, and service company costs crash. And that's for me, that's the saddest part of the crash that we had during COVID is for the service companies. They get pummeled, rigs get laid down, and people lose their jobs. It's it's terrible the way our industry works. It is truly a boom and bust industry, and but the boom is what gets people coming back. It's like going to Vegas. You'll lose 6 or 7 times, right? But that one time, you did well. It gets you to keep coming back to Vegas, and I see that happening right now. The oil and gas industry is attracting money again because the stocks were in the tank. We were the worst performing industry in the financial markets, and now it's with demand coming back, prices being up, we're performing well again. So it's you can just see that enthusiasm happening and money starting to flow back into the industry. But it's different. There was so much money lost, so many companies destroyed, so many lives destroyed that the game has changed. And securing capital these days is way harder than it's been in decades, in my view.
True. All right, so we got one more question, then we'll go into some of the other stuff that we had. Harshal asked a great question. What skills / potential do you look for in an individual intending to transition into the field of reservoir reporting? So I'm guessing going from the field into reservoir reporting. Kind of the same transition you made.
Well, into the field of reservoir
yeah,
reporting.
Well,
so
I'm thinking about going from the field into that because I know we've got a lot of people that watch from the field. So
yeah,
that as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I did work in the field. I worked on the rigs for Chevron, and I transitioned from a drilling engineer or drilling a workover engineer to a production engineer. And then I came to Cawley Gillespie after only 4 years in the industry, and as a reservoir consultant, I didn't have any experience, but I kind of learned on the job. I did a lot of reservoir simulation and a lot of very complex, difficult things. And learned on the fly and worked my way into reserve reporting, and it took decades. I'm on my 3rd decade now. I've been in the business 30 years, and so if you really want to get into reserves and reserve reporting, you need to do reservoir engineering. You need to be whether it's a degree, whether it's getting a graduate degree, whether it's working for an oil and gas company, working for Schlumberger or Halliburton, learning about reservoirs, learning about production, learning about just everything you can. And if you really want to get into my business, which is reservoir engineering and consulting, where we do reserve reporting, then I would recommend taking those routes. There's no reason you can't start at a consultant like ours as an analyst. You can come in as a technical analyst, learn to do graphing, learn to do mapping, learn to do data analytics, whatever it is, and just build on that. You don't necessarily need a petroleum engineering degree. We hire chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, petroleum engineers, and geologists, techs, all kinds. If you're good in math, then you can probably do this pretty easy. It really is not rocket science.
All right. Well, I think we've caught up on all the questions there. So one of the things I was asking, and you mentioned it earlier, like we were talking about with Shell, they just kind of let it ride, but obviously it caught up with them at some point in time. So I'm definitely swerving outside of my lane here. Was the part that caught up with them, is that like the SEC like stepping in and going, hey, now you did something wrong? So what role does the SEC play in reserve reporting?
Yeah, sure. Well, let me jump to a slide and you can put that up there if you don't mind, and I'll here we go. So in North America, there are 3 standards that we follow for reserve reporting and reserves in general. And you named it, SEC, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission. That's in the U.S. There is the SPE, Petroleum Resource Management System. That's U.S., but that's worldwide. And then there's the COGI standards, which is the Canadian Oil and Gas Engineering Handbook. They're all 3 very similar in how they look at reserves and how they look at reserve categories. But there's some nuances between each that make them a little different. And we will prepare reserve reports using any one of these 3 standards depending on the audience, depending on the asset. Obviously, if it's a Canadian company who's on the TSX, they're publicly traded, then we'll prepare a COGI report. But in the U.S., it's if you're publicly traded, then our reports need to be done under the SEC standards. And so you asked, what is the SEC, and did they come down on Shell? The answer is yes, they did. But the SEC is mandated that if you're a public filer, then you need to prepare, you need to file documents through the regulatory systems that they have in place that oil and gas companies have to follow. But you have to file consistent documentation that applies to all companies, so that as an investor, I can see the same thing repeated from company to company to company to company. Everything's done with the same standards, so that as an investor, I can make a proper investment decision. Now, the SEC, when you file something with the SEC, they're going to look at it. And they'll run their standard tests on, let's just say, your reserves and your valuation that you filed. If everything meets their smell test, if everything check the boxes and everything looks good, there's no red flags, then they don't bother you. But often they will find some red flags, and we can talk about some of those red flags, and some of those things could have impacted Shell. But if the SEC does see some red flags, they follow up with you, and they will ask you to clarify. They will ask you to expand on why you made this assumption in your valuation. Why do you continue to say you're going to drill 400 wells a year when the last 3 years you drilled 100 a year? Why do we see inconsistencies there? Or let's think about capital, since capital is so difficult to get these days. But capital is the only way that you can drill wells. You have to spend the money, right? And if you're drilling horizontal wells, you're looking at 5 to 10 million a well or more per well. So it's capital intensive. So the SEC, they want to know, wait a second, can this company, can XYZ afford to drill this? Where are they getting this money? Let's look. And so they care about those kind of things, because let's just give you an example, David. You've got a field. Let's call it a section. It's 1 mile by 1 mile, okay? And you think you have potential to drill 5 wells there, but you don't have any money, or you are. Those 5 wells are going to cost you $50 million, assuming you own 100% of the wells. So you have to show that you have financial ability to drill those wells, especially if you're in a public company position. So there are standards there that the SEC looks at. So back to you started out with Shell. Then, yeah, the SEC saw some red flags there. And basically all the SEC was doing was like, okay, you're stating you're going to do this, but the last few years you haven't done that. So all of a sudden you're going to catch up, and eventually that catches up with you. You can get away with it for maybe a year or two. And I will say this, one of the most important features in the SEC guidelines is the 5-year drilling rule. And I've written about this before, again, on my LinkedIn account. You can go look at that. But the 5-year drilling rule, David, says, okay, every drill that you book in the reserve report has a clock, a 5-year clock. Once you book that, let's say in 2017, that well needs to be producing within the next 5 years, or it goes away. That tells us if you didn't drill it, that tells us you didn't have intent, you overbooked, and we gave you 5 years, and so it's over with. It's not even reserves. They don't even want it moved to a more risky category like probable or possible. They don't consider it reserves. But that 5-year rule is a good rule in that it limits the vastness of drills that somebody could book. Because otherwise you could say, well, yeah, I'm going to drill for 5 years, but I'm really going to drill until I die. I'm going to drill for the next 20 years, but you really don't know what's going to happen in year 10, year 15. None of us do. I mean, do you know anybody that does budgets beyond 3 years, much less 5 to 15 to 20? So The SEC limited your drilling to 5 years. And so once you go live with your reserve report, especially if you're public and you file it, you're kind of locked into that. Everybody's looking at you now. You said, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to drill 25 wells a year for the next 5 years. And you got to hit those targets. And the SEC looks for those things. Your investors look for those things. And so, it's important that you hit those targets. But what happens when something unforeseen like a pandemic happens? Like, you can't reasonably expect me to continue drilling 25 wells a year when I'm April of 2020, we're at $0 on oil. So that's where it gets tricky, and you have things you can do like shifting some of your drills around, reduce your rig count. There's a lot of things you're going to have to do, but the bottom line is every now and then you have to take a write down, and a lot of write downs happened in 2020, as you can imagine.
So they could still own those leases, or they could still own those properties and still go back and drill them in the future, but they're not allowed to put them on their, reserve reporting, essentially, correct? If it's been, if it's surpassed that 5-year time period.
Yeah, absolutely. You still, well, that's another thing to think about. But yeah, if you still own the right to drill there, just because you had to write down 3 wells, it doesn't mean you don't own the acreage. You can always return and drill a well there. No one's going to prevent you from drilling it, but the SEC might prevent you from booking it as a PUD, approved undeveloped location, or a probable. The SEC might prevent you from booking it because it expired, but that doesn't mean you still can't. You can still go out and do it. Often our reserve reports are designed with a drilling schedule that fits the operator's capital structure and timelines. And all those wells, all those drilling locations are very specific. They're specific locations in the Delaware or the Williston or wherever it is. But our clients don't always drill the wells that they say they're going to drill in the report. They often go out and do some exploratory wells, or they try new things, or they try a deeper reservoir. If you've got stacked pays, they might go try something in the Wolfcamp D, for instance. Instead of drilling the A all day long or the B all day long, they go down to the D. And that's fine. And so we adjust in the next report. We see what they did during the year. We make adjustments to reflect, okay, they've drilled up most of the A now, and they're now shifting to the B and the D reservoir in the Delaware Basin. So, our reserve reports reflect a point in time, let's say year-end 2020, and market conditions then, capital conditions then, where the company is in its economic life. And so anyway, I kind of.
Are those reports made public for the publicly traded companies?
Yes, some parts of it are. They are filed as part of their 10K. Sometimes the entire report is filed. Sometimes only subsets are filed, and so you can go out there on a 10K that a company public company has to file annually. You typically won't see it in their 10Qs because our annual report would show up in the 10Ks, but typically when they report their 10Qs, so that's a quarterly report that they have to report, that they have to file, that will often have roll forward information or roll forward details from our prior report. So they'll roll it forward 3 months, file their 10Q and so forth. So yeah, anyway.
Little light bulbs going off in my head. All right.
Good. That's
John DeWar says, grateful if you could describe the difference between calculating probable and possible reserves.
Absolutely. Let me just jump to reserve categories just so that everybody here can make sure we're on the same, talking the same thing. So this is one of the single most important parts of a reserve report because it tells you about risk. It tells you about risk. It tells you about what type of well and what type of company it may be. For instance, let me just run through the reserve categories. So
yeah, go for it.
The least risky is PDP, which is proved, developed, producing. That means I've got wells that are flowing. and to sales, and I'm tracking that production, and we will forecast through that production to come up with a future production and future value. So PDP, least risky category, and it's currently producing. PDNP, the NP is non-producing. They're existing wellbores that aren't flowing at that moment. And they may not be flowing because, let's say, they've got sand in the hole, and they need to clean it out, so they need to work it over. It could be that it's a behind pipe zone, meaning that it's a producer in the Wolfcamp, let's just say the Wolfcamp A, but behind pipe, further up hole, I've got a good looking zone that, let's just call it Sprayberry, just for talking purposes, that I'm going to come up and I'm going to perforate that at some point in time. That's a behind pipe zone. So it's non-producing, but it could be behind pipe, but it's developed. Developed means it's a wellbore. Proved undeveloped is your drills. We're getting into drills now, wells that do not exist. They're undeveloped. They're proven, though. With proven or proved, meaning I've got a known accumulation of hydrocarbons. It's probably producing nearby. It's commercial. It's ready to go. I've got markets out there that'll take my oil and gas. Everything is lined up. So for me to go to sales, so it makes it proven. And so proved undeveloped is it applies to future drills. It also applies to DUCs, which are drilled but uncompleted wells. So for instance, you might drill your horizontal well to total depth, and you come back in and you run your casing, you run your production casing, but you're not producing yet, okay? You haven't stimulated yet, you haven't fracked it yet. Well, the SEC and other agencies, they consider a DUC a PUD. A DUC is a PUD, yeah, it's goofy. But a DUC is a proved undeveloped location. The reason they think it's a DUC, they believe it's a DUC, is it still is going to cost you about 60% of the remaining capital on that well. Let's just say the horizontal well costs $10 million in total. Probably $6 million of that is completion. You know, running your casing, stimulating, fracking, putting in production tubing, and flowing. So we can get into DUCs in a little bit. If anybody has a question on DUC, I'll be glad to answer it. Moving into riskier categories here is probable and possible, which one of the questions is about. Probable implies riskier drilling location than proved undeveloped. Possible is even riskier than probable or PUD. And a good way to think about PUD, probable, and possible, which are your three main drilling categories. PUD has a high probability of success, 90% success rate. Probable is more like a P50 or a 50% success rate. Possible is more like a 10% success rate. So it's a very high number, but it's unlikely to be achieved. So the question, I believe, David, was how do you calculate probable and possible reserves? The difference between, okay. So the difference can be many-fold. A simple difference could be, and I'll just use my hands here, but I've got a producing well right here. I'm going to drill right next to it, a horizontal well right next to it. Well, I'm just right next door. This is pretty analogous. So that's a proved undeveloped drilling location. Okay, but what if I move another location away, or another and another? The further away I move, the more risky the drill is. I'm moving further away from that production. So it could be that a proved undeveloped location is right next door, but because as you step further away, you move into a probable situation where it's less certain and it's a little riskier. And as you move further away, even off the screen there, you're getting into possible territory. So that's one way to think of probable and possible versus PUD. Another way would be that, let's say you've looked at all the producers in an area, and the best producer is a 1 million barrel well, and the worst producer is a 100,000 barrel well with a bunch of different reserves in between. You might look at it that way, that a PUD might only deserve 200,000 barrels. A probable could deserve more because, again, it's considered a P50 or a 50% probability of success. That number would be higher. Let's call it 500,000, and then possible reserves for that drilling location could be higher. Since it's a P10 or very high risk, it could be closer to 800,000 barrels. So for a single drill, it could have proven reserves of 200,000, probable reserves of 500,000, and possible reserves of 800,000. That can be based on just looking at all the wells in the region, doing statistical analysis. It could be doing type curves and looking at spaghetti plots and things like that. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. And I'm only talking right now about unconventional reservoirs, which is where most horizontal wells are drilled these days. There's still this conventional out there, and those reservoirs, conventional reservoirs, which historically have been drilled by vertical wells only, not horizontal. Those reservoirs have different methods for calculating reserves, and so you might have PUD, PROB, and POS reserves that vary there as well. So I don't think I can answer that question because it's kind of a broad question, but hopefully that gave you an idea.
I mean, I definitely think it got us a lot closer than where we started, not knowing anything. So we've got another one here. For the purposes of estimating / valuing reserves, to what extent does variance in production have an impact versus expected value? Are these cases where a lower but more consistent production would be more valuable than a higher but less certain?
Great question. Yeah. Varying production, let's just talk about a single oil well. If you have production that is just like this every month, it's bouncing around, the operator's struggling to keep the well producing, it's a mechanical nightmare, it's got paraffin, the lifting mechanism, let's just say it's a rod pump, and the rods keep breaking, and the well's just inconsistent. Well, its average production is going to be lower. You're struggling to keep that well producing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now next door, you've got a great operator. They stay on top of the well. They never let the well go down. They use better equipment. They have better supervisors. They don't have a paraffin issue. They don't have, and so the production is nice and smooth and consistent. And overall, it's higher. So in that simple scenario, absolutely, the consistent well is more valuable than the inconsistent well, and that's all about risk. Often we will have a well that has production that's bouncing around, and the last month it's up a little bit, and a lot of our clients, they want to forecast off that high point, that last point, just to get the biggest reserves they can. When in reality, you need to forecast the average. I mean, if you want to, just to be simple, you need to forecast the average and don't get caught up in the peaks because the valleys are just as important as the peaks. And but anyway, hopefully that answers the question. But if you expand from one well to thousands of wells, that's a good thing, because just like a stock portfolio, if you're a balanced portfolio and you're in lots of different stocks, you're not just relying on that one stock to perform. You can have some that underperform, some that overperform, and it keeps your portfolio nice and steady on returns, hopefully. Same thing in the oil and gas business. Yeah, same thing in the oil and gas business. It's good to have a variety of wells in different basins so that you can manage the fluctuations aren't as bad on a composite basis versus just living off one well. But one well can make you rich. That's for sure, especially if you use David Gibson's money.
Yeah. Yeah, all my Bitcoin dollars are coming in. I'll invest those in a well. So Dr. Romero's got one. The reserves will be increased if using methods for improved oil recovery like CO2 injection. So enhanced oil recovery methods, or reserve report shows the OOIP. Not sure what that means, but we'll give it a shot.
Yeah, so that's OOIP is original oil in place, which kind of goes back to conventional reservoirs, which we haven't been drilling too many of those lately compared to unconventional. But original oil in place is very important for any reservoir, whether it's conventional or unconventional. But his question was more on reserve increases due to CO2 injection. And you bring up CO2, which has the word carbon in it, and carbon is a key word these days. And so yeah, so in the oil and gas business, there's different ways to enhance your oil production. And in West Texas, in particular, you have oil fields that have produced for 180 years, let's say, 70, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. And the oil production is getting lower and lower and lower from that field. Well, someone figured out a long time ago, hey, let's inject water back into the reservoir. Let's repressurize it. Let's start getting, see if we can give it some life again. And they did, and it worked. And water flooding has been an enhanced oil recovery method for a long time. Still goes on today. And it repressurizes the reservoir, kind of makes it new again, gives it energy, and allows more oil to flow than would have otherwise. Well, then somebody said, well, wait a second. If we can inject water, and I know, let's inject CO2. And so there are also, besides water floods, there's CO2 floods. It's an enhanced oil recovery method, and it's been wildly successful. In some cases, it's not always wildly successful, but the main thing is historically it's been very expensive to do CO2 projects, and that's typically been relegated to the majors, to the bigger operators who can afford to source CO2, have the surface facilities to handle CO2, to inject CO2, to produce CO2, and do that cycle. It's a big operation. It's not for the faint of heart. And so it requires a lot of science to get it right, because an oil field is very complex. It may have multiple reservoirs that you're producing from, but this isn't about CO2 enhanced oil recovery. What he led to something else that's becoming in vogue, and speaking of carbon, so there we know that carbon emissions happen in the oil and gas business. It's just a part of being in the oil and gas business. And the latest trends, as I think most people on this show probably know by now, is getting that carbon, sequestering it, which means putting it back in the reservoir or just pulling it out of the air, capturing it before it gets in the air. And it's called CCUS, Carbon Capture Usage and Sequestration. CCUS is a term everybody should know, or soon they will know. But now the interesting thing, as I was getting to, David, is historically CO2 projects, enhanced oil projects, have been very expensive, and you could only do it when oil prices were really high, right? And I'm talking, once you get up above $70, then you start seeing these CO2 projects happen more. People get more enthused about it. Well, we haven't been in that kind of territory in a long time, $70 oil. But now the government and worldwide governments have come up with, they're working on a carbon structure to compensate people for capturing that CO2 and re-injecting it. And guess who does that better than any industry or in the world, and mainly because we have the reservoirs. We have depleted reservoirs that can take that CO2. And so this has created an unbelievable opportunity for oil and gas companies. And so I see a huge focus, at least in my business as well. We're getting lots and lots of requests to do CCUS projects. And it's going to happen more and more and more as people discover that you can make significant amount of money here, because we're being paid through various means to inject the CO2 now. Whereas in the past, we had to go source it, pipe it there. Man, it's just nightmare. It's very expensive to do. So this is real interesting seeing how the industry is transitioning into being a greener industry, a cleaner industry, but it is also ways to make money there. So a lot of developments coming. So hopefully down the road, you're going to have some, or maybe you already have had some carbon capture experts on, and because it's going to be dominating a lot of the industry, I think, going forward.
Well, we did have one of the guys from Stratum Reservoir back in November. He was on the show, and we talked about it a little bit. So yeah, we've definitely been kind of going down that route already. And it's interesting to hear from your side of it that, you've already had, clients and customers reaching out to you. So is it more about like just being able to enhance their oil production, or is it about just being able to store the CO2 that people are interested in?
Yes.
If you can tell us.
Yeah, both of those. So it's CCUS, it's carbon capture. It can be usage and sequestration. So usage implies I'm going to use my carbon, CO2, and I'm going to inject it, but I'm going to use that to repressurize the reservoir and to help me extract more hydrocarbons. That's one way to do it. And while you're doing that, you're getting paid to inject that CO2, whereas before you didn't. So that's interesting. But there's also sequestration, which means storage. I'm going to have depleted reservoirs, whether it's a hydrocarbon-bearing reservoir or it's a brine, saline reservoir. There's caverns, or different things that different reservoirs that you use for storage. But yeah, so we're looking at sequestering the CO2 as well. I mean, not really reusing it. And there's everything in between, David. There's so many different ways to use CO2, and I see companies like Oxy, for instance. They were in the CO2 flood business, which is enhanced oil recovery business. That's been a big part of their business model for a long time, and so they were already doing this. And this new market has shown up now, and it fits very nicely into what they were already doing. And they already have some of the facilities in place. They've got the reservoirs in place. They're ahead of the game compared to somebody who's never even thought about it. And so yeah. Anyway, to answer your question, there's a lot of ways you can use CO2 to use it or sequester it.
Very interesting to hear. I mean, to be able for the oil and gas industry to go from being the evil oil and gas industry to like the knight in shining armor, I think would be an absolutely amazing turn of events. It's like, oh wow, we can do the geothermal and we can store the CO2. Haha, we're the savior of the day.
David, your show is one of them that is helping our industry improve its image. And I don't see us ever, the oil and gas industry, ever being considered the knight in shining armor. That's hopefully there's some chuckles on the chat here, but we've got a long way to go. I mean, our industry hasn't done a good job about educating the public as to, how does a jet fly somewhere? Well, it needs big engines fueled by big, dense energy. And you can't do that with solar. You can't do that with wind. Right now, you can only do it with jet fuel, which is a petroleum product. It's just a fact of life. People in the world love their cars. There's cities who've tried to implement mass transit, and it just doesn't go over well in suburbia. They want to drive their cars. They want to have their music. They want to have the podcasts in their car. They want to have self-driving cars. Well, that's another thing with electrical vehicles. We talk about that. But hydrocarbons fuel the world. We would not have the quality of life that we all enjoy without hydrocarbons. But do we need to be cleaner? Absolutely. Do we need to reduce and eliminate flaring? Yes, we do. Do we need to run off some of the bad operators or service companies out there that don't dispose of things properly? Absolutely. But we spend so much money, as you know, since you've been on the rigs. We could drill our wells for less than half of what we do if we didn't spend so much money on safety and regulations and environmental things to keep that drill site safe, to contain the fluids, to prevent blowouts, to keep our workers healthy. So we spend so much money on that kind of stuff that we don't educate the public on. And I'm trying to do some of that today, and I know you do it regularly, and I hope everybody that's listening will educate people on every piece of plastic that you touch, which you're probably sitting on it, you're looking at it right now. That comes from petroleum product. We're wearing it, even the glass in our glasses. I mean, all that cement. People don't realize how cement is created, and it requires extreme high density energy to make cement. And so there's so many things in our world that are better because of hydrocarbons. So yeah, let's clean up our act a little bit, but let's also educate the public.
Very good. Well, I got one other question here, and I want to make sure that we get to any of the other things that you had lined up, because I know there was plenty there. So I'll ask you this question, and then we'll go back to whatever you've got to be able to round out and see if we had any more questions after that. So Nick asked, do you believe conventional oil will see a significant uptick in terms of U.S. production? Is there enough of this left throughout the lower 48?
Great question. If you could put up my slide, and I'll talk from that for a minute.
Yeah.
Cool.
Boop, boop.
Okay, good. Thank you. So he asked about conventional versus unconventional. So this slide is a simple slide, and I'll admit I stole this off somewhere. But this slide shows a conventional deposit on the left and an unconventional or non-conventional on the right. But by conventional deposit, he typically means vertical drilling that is drilling into a pretty permeable reservoir. That it has permeability, it has porosity, things flow better in that reservoir, and it's typically trapped by some geologic anomaly. And on the unconventional side, which is more on the right side of this chart, it shows, if you can see at the bottom of the wellbore, yeah, they drilled vertical for a while, but once they got to the reservoir, the target reservoir, they drilled horizontally. But they target reservoirs that are less permeable, less porous. They're typically source rocks where the hydrocarbons are generated. Historically, or back in the old days, the vertical wells, the conventional drilling, it would go through these shales, these impermeable rocks, and we didn't think anything about it. And again, I mentioned George Mitchell, the Barnett Shale earlier. They unlocked the potential with horizontal drilling and fracture stimulation, and it changed the world. It changed the U.S. production profile. It pushed our production to all-time highs, rig counts to all-time highs, but it unlocked a source rock that we previously thought was impermeable and not conducive to flow or being commercial. But back to his question, the question's about, do I think conventional is making a comeback? Yes, I do. I do think that because the wells are much, much, much cheaper to drill, and now we've improved our completion technology, which was accelerated tremendously because of horizontal drilling. It's incredible what the service people that are watching today, what they do in the field, whether it comes to drilling, with the muds they use and the speed at which they drill, and landing that well in the right spot and staying in zone, to running the casing, to stimulating, to fracturing the rock. All of that can be applied to vertical drilling, conventional drilling, and it will. So I do think, yes, it's been making a comeback for a while, and it's going to see a lot more opportunities, a lot more drills, a lot more focus, but it will not supplant unconventional drilling. It will not be have a new heyday. I think conventional wisdom is that the best rock is already owned. A lot of the best conventional rock has already been produced, or it's on its last legs. But I've been proven wrong before. I do think that, let's just say, David, somebody calls you up and says, I want you to invest in my well. I want you to buy 1% of my well. David, please get in on this one. I'm going to make you rich. And you go, how much does that well cost? And, well, we're doing a horizontal well, and it's a $10 million well. So you can do the math there. But another guy calls and says, David, man, I've got this great conventional target. It's only 2,000 feet deep. It's going to cost $300,000 to drill it. I just want you to buy 1%. And so you've got a problem. You've got to think about, okay, I got to outlay a lot more capital for this unconventional horizontal drill, but that particular well most likely will not be a dry hole. I know it's there because we're just repeating what everybody next door is doing. We're just drilling another cookie cutter well. But I'm not going to have a dry hole, so I know I'm gonna get some production. I'm gonna get some revenues. may take a little longer for me to get paid back, but man, I got to outlay a lot of capital up front. Well, your other buddy says, hey, I've got a $300,000 well to drill, and I just need you to put up $30,000, and you can have your little piece. But wait a second, it's a conventional target. Could it be depleted? Could it be a dry hole? Yeah, it could. You could have just those sunk costs and never get them recovered. So there's a lot to balance when you're considering what types of wells, what types of reservoirs. But to answer his question, yeah, I think conventional is having a comeback because there is lack of capital. Do you want to go sink $10 million into one well or drill 50 conventional wells or 20 conventional wells, vertical wells? So a lot to consider there. But anyway, back to this slide. If you've been looking at the slide while I'm talking here, typical conventional deposits are some type of structural feature or trapping mechanism. Unconventional doesn't necessarily need a trap, a structural thing like you do with conventional deposits. A lot of the hydrocarbons are just trapped in place because the rock is so tight, it's got nowhere to go. It can't leak off. That conventional deposit over there that has natural gas and oil, it exists because of the source rock or the shale. The hydrocarbons generated from the shale have migrated and got trapped over there, and that conventional target exists because of the beauty of hydrocarbons generated in shale. But the great thing is we learned how to unlock shells and produce directly from the shells. And so that's what's kind of revolutionized our industry in the last decade or more and improved the technologies. And kudos to all the service people on the call here who've done incredible things out there. Yep, you included, David, that have unlocked that, because without fracture stimulation, we don't have that resurge in U.S. productivity.
Well, I've got another random question for you, and I know you still got some other things, so I want to ask this one when you get ready for your last bit. What's been the best? You don't have to say who it is or anything, but like, what's been the lowest cost per barrel that you have seen that's come across your desk, like in the last, like, let's just say 2 to 3 years?
You talking about operating costs? Are you talking about?
Yeah, as far as like an operating cost, as far as like what they've been able to say that they can, produce it, $10 per barrel or $20 per barrel, because we hear these things all the time that like, U.S. land is not profitable at below, $45 per barrel. But yeah. I've specifically talked to some operators in projects that I've been included upon, and they said, "Oh, we're good at 30." I'm like, yeah. Oh, if you're good at 30, that means you're still being profitable. It's not like you're just making $1 per barrel. You're still making a sizable margin there. Like the investment is still worth it. So yeah. I'm just curious from your point, like, what's the best that you've seen come across your desk without, naming any names?
Well, before I answer that, let me tell you the game that's played, David, in this. Okay. My rate of return or my break even is this, and the game that's played there to show is remember, you had to go acquire the land years ago. Okay. Then you had to develop that prospect. You had to have exploration geologists. You had to have teams involved. You have a lot of money sunk there. Then you had to go out and drill that well, right? And so there's a lot of costs that go into drilling well, but that AFE that you're familiar with, as you get on the drilling rig, you've got an AFE, which is appropriation for expenditure. That is the cost to drill and complete a well, all in cost on site, not those other costs I mentioned of buying the acreage, doing the exploration, and finding that prospect. But drilling and completing the well, that cost is often what people reference when they talk about rate of return. I'm sinking $10 million into this drill for the drill and surface facilities. So I'm going to run my numbers. I'm going to look at the production. I'm going to look at the revenues. I'm going to look at the costs, and I'm going to come up with my rate of return. And they judge break evens from that. And that's where you hear $50 oil, I'm good, $40 oil, I'm good. But in reality, you spent a lot of money to drill that one well. Well, maybe that one well doesn't deserve all that acreage cost, but it deserves some. And they often don't put that in there. And so the real break even is higher. You need it. So typically you got to know what they're saying. If they go, yeah, I'm good at $40 oil, you need to know, okay, is that based on just the AFE to drill that well, or is it based on other sunk costs? And so the lowest I've seen, and that's not even a fair question to ask, because you still have vertical wells, you still have horizontal wells, you have different basins. But are you talking about like right now, David? Like right now it's $60 oil, or are you talking about when? Because it just depends. At $100 oil, it's one thing. At negative 37, it's another. I think if in a horizontal drilling world, unconventional drilling world, you're going to need bare bones. You're going to almost any basins, you got to be at $40 or higher, in my view. Some operators, let's just pick on EOG for instance. They're so good at what they do.
I like picking on EOG.
What?
I said I like to pick on EOG.
Okay. Well, they're so good at what they do, and they have such skill, meaning they drill lots of wells, they have lots of rigs, they have lots of really good contracts out there that keep their costs down. When they do it at scale like that, you can keep your costs down, which help your rate of return be a little bit higher, and that break-even point can be a little higher. So they typically have very good lower break-even points than others. But so I'm dancing around your question, I have to admit, because it's apples.
That's right. We can save it after the show. All right. Well, we've slowed down a little bit on the questions. Anything else out there that you would like to be able to educate the audience on Todd, and let them know about?
Well, yes, I do want to do this. Well, is it too late, David? How much time do you want to? When do you want to?
Man, we've got all day. This show's dedicated to you, sir.
You're the man. Okay, I'm going to go quickly. Okay, but I want to. This is kind of Reserve Report 101. If you would put the slide up. Okay, I want to quickly run through two key things that are in a reserve report. So this is a Cawley-Gillespie rate time plot. It looks like this in all Cawley-Gillespie reports. But what this does, it shows on the x-axis on the left, it shows rates, oil and gas production rates, and on the y-axis, it's time. And this plot shows historical production, which is on the left, in green and red, green being oil, red being gas, and it shows forecasted production on the right. And that forecasted production on the right is what I'm hired to do, is to look at the production on the left, which is historical, and forecast the stuff on the right. And this particular plot, or this graph, is a roll-up or a summary of all the wells in a reserve report I pulled. And you can see the well count there, the black dots. We're looking at a 35 or 25 well report, not that many wells. But the thing I wanted to show you is this is fairly standard when it comes to a roll-up plot. This is a total proved plot. That means it's got PDP wells, producing wells, PDNP, non-producing wells, and it has future drills, proved undeveloped wells. This is a roll-up of the forecasts associated with this reserve report. And usually at the top there, it's got a header. It describes, okay, what's the reserve category? Well, this is total proved. Who's the client? This one's Example Exploration LLC Interest. It's usually an official name of the ownership. And then it lists where it is. And this is various oil and gas properties in Texas. But on our plots, we typically show at the top right the reserves. And you can't really see it, but just understand that it shows the cumulative production, the historical production. It shows remaining reserves. It shows what that revenue is associated with it, taxes, expenses, and then the cash flow. But this is a rate time plot, and I'm not sure how many people have seen this, but this is kind of a visual of the future oil and gas production this particular client can expect. Now I'm going to go to the next page. So that's the first. And the next one is the most important page in a reserve report, in my view, is the cash flow page. This shows the data raw data, annual data for production, volumes, and a lot of other things. I'm going to get into that real quick because I think it's important for anybody that looks at oil and gas company valuations, ever touches a reserve report like this one I showed up earlier. You know, you're going to have pages like that in the reserve report. And let me run through this cash flow page, and I'll answer any questions about this you want. Okay, on the left, as you can see, it's the years. Each one of those lines represents a year. This reserve report has an effective date of December 31st, 2019, as stated at the top. That's when the clock starts. That's when the valuation starts, December 31, 2019. So we're looking at that point forward. The first two columns, columns 2 and 3 there, are gross oil and gas production that comes out of the wellhead. Okay, pretty simple. And this is, now again, these are our forecasts of gross oil production and gross gas production. The next 3 columns that are circled are product sales. Net oil production or sales, net gas sales, and net NGL sales. Those numbers are based on taking the gross production, gross gas and oil, and multiplying that times the net revenue interest, or just the revenue interest of the ownership, and we show the net production. In the case of gas, it might have shrinkage taken out of it, which in this case, you'll notice that we have oil production, gas production, and NGL production. And it really should be called sales in this case, but that tells me right away that I know that the gas in this case goes through a processing plant, and at the exit of the plant is residue gas or dry gas and liquids, NGLs. And so we value that in our report. What is that gas worth? What is that NGL worth? And in this case, we're talking about volumes. So back to the slide. If you further right, there are the prices, the net prices received, assumed in the report. And there you can see oil, gas, and NGL prices. $53 oil, $1.15 is received on the gas. NGLs are $17.65. Those are the net product prices received. The base prices that we started with here were higher, but you don't receive index prices or base or market prices because you have to get it to market. You have to pay fees to get it to market. Those fees have been extracted here, and we're showing the net. So that $53 oil times the 111,000 barrels of oil in 2020 gets you to your revenue. Let's move to the next tier right there. Revenue sources. So again, the oil revenue is based on that oil price you saw up there and the oil production, net oil production. So here we show oil revenue, gas revenue, and NGL revenue. We also have other columns for hedge revenue or other revenue. We don't have anything there because this is just straight up oil, gas, and NGL revenue. And then we total it up and do a total revenue column by year. So that's your revenue. So that's the money. Now you got to pay to receive this money, and we're going to move into costs. So the first cost that you have to pay the state. You have to pay the local municipalities and your state or whatever country you're in. You have production taxes. You have to pay taxes on the oil, on the gas, on the NGLs, and often those rates vary. Oil might have a different rate percentage for tax than gas and NGLs. In Texas, it's 4.6 on oil, 4.6% of revenue on oil, and 7.5% of revenue on gas and NGL. You also have to pay ad valorem taxes, or more like property taxes. That might be local, something more local to the well, and those will vary depending on the locality of the well. The next column we have in this particular format is lifting cost, dollars per BOE. And we'll skip to the bottom tier. And this is really one page. I split it into two so you can see it. Now we get down to the good stuff. Operating expenses, column 22 there. That's what it costs to operate the well. And it could also be that the costs are broken into operating expenses and other deductions. And the way we handle it at Cawley, fixed expenses on a well are in the operating expense column. And variable expenses are over in the other deductions column. Variable expenses might be costs that are on a per barrel basis, like oil. If you're producing 1,000 barrels a day on a well, then you're going to have higher costs than maybe later in life when that well is producing 100 barrels a day. Let's say you're lifting that oil with an electric submersible pump, an ESP. Well, you need a much bigger pump at 1,000 barrels a day than you do at 100 barrels a day. You won't even be using a pump at 100 barrels a day. You will be using some type of rod lift maybe. And so your costs can change there depending on the volume of oil you're producing. Same thing for gas, same thing for water. You have water produced with these wells, and that water has to be disposed of. If you're trucking that water off your lease, you're paying high dollars. You could be paying $2 to $5 a barrel. That would be in the other deductions column. If you're injecting it on site, and you have a saltwater disposal well, your costs are going to be much lower for water disposal. So anyway, this is where costs are shown. And then we get, this one also shows investments. It's very light on investment here. $1.8 million is invested in 2020. And then all of this, the revenues we created, the expenses that we showed, and then the investment, if you take the revenues less your costs, you end up with your future net cash flow. And column 29 there shows the cash you're expecting every year. And then column 30 there accumulates that and shows the cumulative dollars you're going to receive over the life of this asset. So if you look down close to the bottom there, you'll see this asset will recover $17.4 million over its life. But what if I was to bring that to current day's dollars, discounting that cash flow to current time at a rate of 10%? That's what the final column there shows. And you see that $17 million over the life of the asset is worth $11.2 million to me now, or to someone now, if you assume the 10% discount rate. Just below that, we show additional discount rates. And you can see there's discount rates from 5 to 20%. And this is an interesting thing to get into, because often when people look at this page, look at this cash flow page for total proved, they will look down here at the table of discount rates. And the bigger the discount rate, the lower the value. And this flexes depending on market conditions if you're looking to buy assets. And I know we're running out of time. We won't get into A&D too much today, but when you're looking at a cash flow page like this, that's one of the critical things to look at, is what are my values at different discount rates? Because you may be willing to pay bigger dollars for producing wells, for PDP. You may be willing to pay 10% discount rate. But for riskier stuff like drills, you might be only be willing to pay 20% discount rate on the value of just those wells. In today's market, the numbers are way worse than that. In good times, you're seeing people pay 8% discount rates on producing wells, or even less, even down to 5%, depending on how bad you want that property. But in bad times, it goes the other way, and you'll see no one paying anything for upside, for any drills. They only want, they'll pay you for the production, they'll take the properties off your hand, but we're not going to give you anything for upside and drills. And that's kind of the market we're in right now, where you don't see much being paid for upside, except in rare circumstances where it's just an attractive asset. Just a simple example, recently Pioneer bought Parsley, and Parsley was a very attractive asset. It overlaid what Pioneer, the assets they already had, and there was a lot of synchronicity between the two companies. And when you reduce your G&A, and you can enhance the value in more ways. But I think they paid for upside in that deal. I think it's a foregone conclusion. But in most deals that are going on right now, there's not a whole lot being paid for upside. The last thing I want to point out on this page, if you pop it back up there, David, I didn't get to, is the price deck that was used. In this case, it was an SEC year-end 19 price deck. The SEC mandates that you use flat pricing. That means not a futures strip price deck. It's one number for oil, one number for gas. And at year-end 19, the average price during 2019 was $55 oil and $2.58 on gas. I can't say the same for year-end 20 with negative $37 in there, and the numbers are not very good. It's significantly less. So that impacted reserve reports this year, as you can imagine. It impacted valuations, it impacted capital availability and all those things. Anyway, I'm glad I got to that, David. I just wanted to at least have people understand what is in a reserve report, cash flow statement, and I hope people found that somewhat educational if they're even still tuned in. You're on mute. You're on mute, David.
Sorry, I had to cough earlier, so I had to put myself on mute. But I don't really care if anybody's watching at this point because I know I'm learning from it. So if anybody is still out there watching, then please let us know what you think in the comment section, guys. Thank you so much. Wow, I mean, so much to take in from all of this. Like, obviously, this just goes to show why there is the whole niche vertical of just reserves reporting on its own and how important it is and how it plays a big role in our entire industry. Because obviously, if things don't look like they're going to be of any value, then we're not going to drill them. So it's good to be able to make sure that the correct and right predictions are done so companies don't get themselves in a bad spot, get themselves where they need to be and are profitable on a continuous basis so nobody's going out of business. All really, really, really important stuff. And I appreciate it so much. So we do still have people watching. Duncan says, great show, great information. Armin says, oh, sorry, trying to click through here. Great show. Brian says, great show. And then LinkedIn user, as always, says, interesting topic and thanks. So thank you guys all for still being here and watching. I know there's been a lot of stuff here that's taken place. And this is excellent. We are listening. We appreciate the insights into an area I'm not exposed to often. Thank you. And so that's what we're trying to do with the show, you guys. Like, there is a lot of stuff that, you know, is, I would say, within my wheelhouse or things that I know a lot about, and we come on and we talk about fairly in depth. But we also want to be able to broaden our horizons and to be able to understand more about our industry and some of the different things that take place in offices that are down the hall from us, or for me, I'm working right alongside a petroleum engineer here, and he talks about this stuff to me all the time, and it just straight over my head. So it's good to now have a better understanding of some of this, and I'm not having to bug him all the time. So big shout out and thanks to Rick Allen from Longview Petroleum, who's my office mate here at the building. So Todd, thank you so much for being on the show. We really do appreciate it. And maybe the next time we'll do the A&D stuff or whatnot. We'll definitely have to do a round two. We'll gather up all the questions and everything that come in from this one. Again, we've got David saying, great show. Dr. Romero, good learning. Thanks for the information. So everybody enjoyed it. I know a lot of people were taking stuff in, and this will be one of those, I believe, one of these episodes where people will go back and rewatch and be able to learn a lot from. And hopefully any of the students that maybe have tuned in will share this with some of the other students and be able to learn something as well. Isabella says, great topic. Cost is very important for operators and service companies. Very true. All right, guys. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Remember, Monday at 1 p.m. 1 p.m. Make sure you've got your VR headset. If you haven't ordered it off of Amazon already, maybe they'll sell them at Best Buy. I don't know. Maybe Walmart. I've even seen them at gas stations. Be sure to go ahead and get you a set so that you can watch it. You can be fully immersed in the VR 360 experience. Monday at 1 p.m. I'll be at the rig in Catoosa, Oklahoma, the Catoosa test rig facility. So special thanks to Dwayne and the team out there for allowing me the opportunity to be able to go out there and film it, along with filming some other stuff that we'll have in store for you guys later on. So with that, thank you, everybody, for watching. Joshua says, great conversation. Todd, thanks for sharing. So with that, everybody, I want you guys to go have an absolutely amazing weekend, and we will see you on Monday at 1 p.m. That's it for today. Know your industry.